Well, winter, of course, is upon us. There's certainly a chill in the air, but it's almost certain that this year is going to be colder and darker than the last one. Finweek's cover story this week looks at what Eskom is not telling you. According to the article, the numbers don't add up, and it's almost certain that there's going to be significant economic disruption from rolling blackouts across the country. So here to take a look at whether this will be the case, we've got Finweek journalist Garth Theunissen and Jessica Hubbard, spokesperson for Eskom, Hilary, Joffe and Yelland, MD at EE Publishers. Thanks for joining us. Hilary, I'll just start off with you because, of course, we have been warned. It's certainly been across the press that we could be facing blackouts. So just remind us again, for those of us who don't know why we're looking at this 5 years down the line, why there could potentially be load shedding in South Africa.
I was very struck by the cover of the Finweek story, which says what Eskom is not telling you, and then proceeds to run with a story in which every piece of information, in fact, comes from Eskom. We've been very, very transparent about this, and we plan to continue to be transparent and to share. These are difficult issues. We have a very tight power system. We run a very complex organization, and I think it's really important that we share with the country where we are and where we're headed, and I think we have done that. And the information in that article, at least, is based on what we have disclosed. But let me convey what we have been trying to say, really. We've said for a while now that we have a very tight power system. Our power stations are aging. We have kept the lights on for 5 years now, since the load shedding of 2008. We have done that in part by recent years by deferring maintenance on our rather aging power stations. So we've been running them hard. They need maintenance. Normally in winter we would cut maintenance down to the absolute minimum because demand is higher. This winter we cannot afford to do that, and indeed going 5 years out we just need to sustain maintenance on our existing power stations to make sure that they last the many years which we still need them to last as a country and provide the capacity we need them to provide. So we've said that going into maintenance, into winter, we're not compromising on maintenance. We are going to do what we had planned to do. We had some challenges in summer, which meant that we couldn't do quite what we planned to do in February, March, April. So we have built up a little bit of a backlog recently. Now that means,
I mean, when you talk about a little bit of a backlog, just explain what that means.
A backlog over and above what we already had. We had said some time ago that we had a backlog. We've been working to reduce it. We have been doing maintenance, but we have there was maintenance planned in summer which we did not get to because we had lower imports from Mozambique because of floods. We had an unplanned outage at Hubbard. We had strikes at Exara, and there were several factors which rather hampered our plans during summer. So going into winter, we need to sustain this fleet of power stations. It's the one that the country's got, and we need to look after it. And we have been seeing higher levels, really lower levels of performance, if you like, because we're not doing the maintenance we should be doing. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't provide the electricity the country needs, but it does mean, particularly at peak, that we're running at very high levels of risk.
So talk to us about what that means. I mean, what is peak demand and what is Eskom capacity? Put that into numbers for us.
Look, capacity is quite a flexible thing in a way because you defer maintenance, you get more capacity. That's what we don't want to do.
So you're saying it's not,
yes.
Bill Brian Damas has said it's a non-negotiable in 2030.
Exactly. But let me talk to you a little bit about the peak because that's really important, and particularly in fact for consumers, because what you get in winter, late in the afternoon, is you get this sudden and very sharp jump in demand. It's everyone coming home, street lights switch on, home lights switch on, heaters switch on, people start cooking, they get into the shower, so the geyser goes on, and you get this jump which can be 3,000, even 4,000 megawatts in just an hour. Now that is all households, and it is more than a power station sometimes that we need extra to keep on the grid, sitting there all day waiting just to meet that demand. And the reason we are urging people to work with us to beat the peak is because if we could just flatten that peak, and that just means use it some other time, switch off your geyser, heat it up later, switch off your fuel pump, cook at lunchtime. If you can just flatten that peak, and that's something which is up to households to do, we would need a lot less capacity. In fact, online we could do a lot more maintenance. We would be much less tight for those 2-3 hours in the evening. And that, I think, is why we are being so strong about the message that we are going into a very tight winter, and we just have to, as a country, manage that, because it's not inevitable that we have to go to load shedding. I think it is possible that, with support, we can avoid it. And we certainly as Eskom are determined to avoid it.
Can I just come in there? I mean, I take Hilary's point. I didn't write the story and I didn't write the headline, but I do think there are some questions that kind of remain unanswered. Probably the biggest overarching one is, I think to a lot of people, it seems like, is Eskom losing the battle against keeping up with South Africa's power demands? From my understanding, Medupi is delayed by another 6 months. That's obviously going to put enormous strain going into winter. Why are we here 5 years after the last blackouts, facing another situation where we could potentially have a whole winter of blackouts? Then there are other things like what's going on with the preferential tariffs for BHP Billiton.
Let's get into that. That's the second one. That's the second issue.
So I just want to finish the questions that I think people feel they need answers to. Is Eskom going to be engaging with BHP Billiton to potentially renegotiate that contract? Then the other thing that's on my mind is South Africa supplying power to SADC countries like Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Botswana, and obviously the smaller ones like Swaziland and Lesotho? Are we in a position to be exporting power when we don't have power at home? And then probably also a big one, which James does mention in the story, is what is going on with the nuclear plan. From my understanding, and this is also Eskom stats, which I agree with you did provide, currently 5% of South Africa's generating capacity comes from nuclear. According to your own projections, that needs to increase to 20% by 2030. But as far as I know, no sites have been approved, no work has started on building a nuclear site. So I'm not sort of having a go at you, just asking where are we in that process?
All legitimate questions, and they could keep us going for many hours. So let me dodge the first one, which is nuclear. It is the government's prerogative to that 20% is a government figure. Government is making those decisions. We certainly as Eskom would urge that decisions are made timeously about new capacity, because the trouble we've run into as a country is precisely because decisions were not made in the last round time. I mean, Medupi should have started to build years before it did, and it should have been online years before it did. So certainly, I think as a country we've learned that lesson, that political uncertainty we can't afford again. Let me get to BHP Billiton, because it's an easy one. We did attempt to renegotiate the contracts with BHP Billiton. We have now reviewed that agreement to the regulator, NERSA, the National Energy Regulator.
Reviewed or referred, you mean?
We have referred, to the regulator for review.
Okay.
The regulator plans to hold public hearings on the matter. We have put in a submission and we look forward to that. So I think that will be a very good forum in which the country can look at these things. I should add that part of that contract is that we have the full right to interrupt supply to those smelters, the aluminium smelters, for no compensation and with no warning. And we do in fact use that. It only is for up to 2 hours a week, but we do actually use that in managing the power system, especially when it's very tight.
But essentially they still pay less than the average South African consumer.
Certainly that is why we've wanted it to be reviewed, and that's why we did try to negotiate it. It dates back 20 years, and yes, clearly it is no longer desirable or appropriate.
Okay, fair enough.
Exports again. I think you do have to think about whether we want to be a sort of a sea of prosperity in an island of poverty. But realistically, net exports, we both export and import power with our neighbours. We get a lot of power from Mozambique. On a net basis, exports are 1% of our sales. 1% and 1.5%. So I'm not sure why it's such a big issue, but it is an issue.
So how much is that? I mean, if you had to stop exporting that, surely that could plug to a certain degree the power that's needed during winter.
Well, yes, if we were to stop importing, what would that do to us? I mean, I think one must look at it as a trading relationship. There's an interactive part of it. And in fact, we are not, there are countries which we are contracted to supply a certain amount. Over and above that, we help if we can, and that's the agreement there's a power pool in the region, and we have an agreement that we will supply each other in emergencies if we can. If we can't, we don't. Botswana, for example, has recently had load shedding because we could not help them. We did not have the surplus capacity to help them, and they had troubles on their own plant. So I think it is not something we do beyond the contracted amounts if we are not in a position to do so. And they do pay premium prices, and they do have the kind of arrangements that we have with large customers. It's not any sort of special dispensation our neighbours have. And I do think we would like to see more imports from our neighbours. And more of a development of the grid in the region. I think that's our
So just to
position,
clarify,
yeah.
is load shedding and shortages a regional issue? Is it something faced by a number of our neighbouring countries?
As it happens, they have been, because they have had issues. That is the one I know about. Botswana has had issues on its own power plant, and because we did not have surplus, we could not help them with extra. So it could happen that you could have countries in the region running into trouble. What power outages there have been in recent times, and I think people have drawn attention to this, is not load shedding. If you have a transformer failing on your local grid, or lightning strike or whatever, or a infrastructure problem, or for that matter overloading, that is a local level outage, and of course you do get them more in winter, in both municipal areas and ours. But load shedding is what we want to avoid, and we have avoided at a national level since 2005. It certainly is a valid question to ask, why is the power system still so tight? I think, as I said, the new capacity which we started building in 2005 the big new capacity takes a long time. We have added some new capacity, but clearly not enough, and it will be very, very important to bring both Mzdupi and Kusile online in the next few years. I think we've addressed a lot of the problems that caused 2008. And the Eskom of now is very different to what it was there. But the challenge of a tight system and of aging power stations is very much still with us. But it is something, I think, which as a country we can manage.
Hilary, I'm just going to stop you on that point, because I think it's time to get to Chris's independent view on this. So someone certainly does follow the energy sector in South Africa very closely, Chris.
May I just step in to answer one or two things? That, Hilary mentioned that we've kept the lights on by deferring maintenance. Was the one thing she said, and the other thing was that there has been no load shedding since 2008. I would disagree with that. I think we have been having load shedding since 2008, and we have it right now. She's talked about the fact that we load shed BHP Bulletin for up to 2 hours a week that releases 2,000 megawatts at peak period, and that is happening right now, and it has an economic impact. So load shedding is taking place there.
That's output that's not coming from the miner.
Yeah, but there's also load shedding through the paying of industrial customers like the ferrosmelters, like steel producers, to switch off load. And Eskom have announced that this has released approximately 1,000 megawatts of capacity. So that's another form of load shedding. Load shedding means to shed load, to switch off. And they are paying people to switch off. Thirdly, they're going on radio requesting you and I and the whole country to switch off our geysers and pool pump motors, and they've advised us that they're saving approximately 320 megawatts by this form of load shedding. And yet it's still not enough. They have to run the open cycle gas turbines flat out for quite a few hours a day, something that they really do not like doing because it costs something like R2 to R2.50 a kilowatt hour just in diesel fuel to run those open cycle gas turbines. So we have a really serious problem. We are load shedding, albeit on a more controlled basis than the chaos that occurred in 2008. And we have learned from 2008. We've put in place plans. Eskom municipalities have put in place plans, and it is helping. And without the load shedding that we have experienced, this controlled load shedding, we would be in the field of uncontrolled load shedding right now.
I just want to bring to the table things that concern me, because it's not just about 2013. It's about when the economy picks up with the global economy. It's about when demand starts picking up. And it's also about when you have to start decommissioning some of your power stations. I mean, I remember going to a press conference about junior coal miners and trying to get junior coal miners to start supplying Eskom with coal. That, of course, is an issue as well. The decommissioning of those power stations. I mean, how many are set? When is the first big one set to start being decommissioned? How much is going to be decommissioned? And will you be able to make up that by adding Kusile and Mzdupi?
If I can just say first that Chris, we can talk semantics, but Chris makes perfectly valid points that we have had if whether you want to call it demand reduction, which is probably what we'd call it, or Chris prefers to call it load shedding.
Controlled load shedding.
that if you don't have enough supply, you do have to reduce demand in order to keep the lights on. And it's certainly true that we've had very significant help from our large customers, and that's why, in a sense, we want to spread the burden by asking our smaller customers to also contribute by reducing demand. And it is true that higher rates, I mean, if the commodity cycle were to pick up and demand were to pick up, yes, we would be very much more stretched than we are now. But we would like to be supporting success, not constraining the economy. So that is the importance of the build
Stretched,
program.
I would suggest, to the extent that electricity would no longer be the engine of the economy, but will be holding back the economy.
That's exactly. So let's get to the issue of these decommissioning power plants.
2020s.
2020, how many are going to start coming up? Because we're 7 years away from that.
Look, yeah, there are several of the power stations. Many of the power stations were built in the 1970s and 80s, and the life of a coal-fired power station is typically 50, but you can invest in it to extend it to 60. So you can do the maths. In the 2020s, we do start decommissioning the oldest of the coal-fired power stations, and that is why it is very important that the country makes decisions about what new capacity is going to be built over and above the capacity that we are currently building. That's where nuclear fits in. That is not in Eskom's domain to make those decisions. It is in government's domain. But whether Eskom does it or whether the private sector does it, new capacity beyond Medupi, Kusile and Ngula will be needed. And pricing beyond the current time frame will also have to be looked at in terms of how you're going to fund that new capacity, whoever builds it.
Just a quick question, Hilary. Just referring to something in the story, James has said that Eskom believes the equivalent of 10 new coal mines producing an average of 4 million tonnes per year need to come on stream in order to keep or supply Eskom adequately with coal up until 2018. Where is Eskom with regard to coal supply? Have you got enough coal? Do you project that you will have enough coal going forward to produce the power that we need?
I think James would have picked up what we said, which was that we need that beyond 2018.
Yes.
Yeah. Until 2018, more than 80% of the coal that we need is contracted.
Okay.
Our concern that we flagged in the presentation that your journalist was at last week was that beyond 2018, out over the lives of the power stations, the coal is there under the ground, but the investment is not happening in the new mining which is going to be needed. So I think we are working with government and with the industry, and there is a real concern about not only getting the investment into new coal mines, but also getting new coal being produced at prices which the country can afford, because of course a very, very significant component of power prices is coal prices.
Is the government taking any steps to address that problem? Are you seeing any?
Well, they have declared it as a strategic resource, but I mean, where do we go from that? I mean, what exactly does that mean?
May I say, Hilary's mentioned the threat through lack of investment in coal resources, but I fear greatly that Eskom's and the government's wish to declare coal a strategic commodity and control the price of coal to what they perceive lower levels will have exactly that effect. It will reduce investment in coal mining. It'll make it cheaper. It will make it less attractive to mine coal in South Africa, and it will entrench the dirty energy, coal energy scenario that we are in, and it will prevent and inhibit moves towards cleaner energy, towards higher technology, towards renewable energy, towards nuclear, towards imported hydro. If we entrench this coal economy, we actually need coal to move to world market prices, to put the right signals in the South African economy, to the generation sector, to do the right thing for the future. These things come to bite us. When you control prices, eventually there will be a price shock. As we are already seeing with the price of electricity, when the price of electricity was kept to artificially low levels, it catches up with you, comes as a shock to the system, and it damages the economy.
If I can just quickly go back to nuclear and ask you one quick thing. I understand that your hands are tied because government needs to make the decision. From Eskom's point of view, what is causing government to drag its heels on the nuclear rollout?
I don't think we'd want to speculate. There is an interministerial committee led by the Deputy President, which is doing the work that's needed. This is not a small decision to make. Look, it is the, you know, it would cut emissions. It would very much align with the country's strategy of reducing emissions. We're looking at very, very large capital costs. It's a very big decision to make, and how we fund it is as a country is a really a big issue. So we certainly are urging that decisions be made not only on nuclear but on any other capacity beyond 2019, when Kusile should be completed.
I know that every time I ask someone from the Department of Energy or from government, it's a question that they choose to rather not talk about. From your side, Chris, as someone who's a little bit more independent than Eskom?
I think within government there are people pulling in different directions. And I personally believe that nuclear is an important part of the energy mix, but there are other parts of the energy mix that are also equally neglected, and I mention gas, natural gas from Mozambique. Really needs to be looked at extremely seriously by Eskom, and I hope they are doing this, because natural gas from Mozambique could change the rules of the game. And even the energy intensive user group are suggesting that the integrated resource plan for electricity, IRP 2010 to 2030, should be reviewed with a really serious view to perhaps considering gas as a partial alternative to nuclear. But important to say that I do believe we need a balanced portfolio of energy sources to manage risk. It is no good putting it all your eggs into nuclear, or all your eggs into natural gas, or all your eggs into renewables. You need this complete balanced portfolio.
And Chris, James also flagged water shortages as a potential problem down the line. How big do you think that issue is going to become?
I'm not an expert on water, but from what I read, it's a serious issue. And nuclear has some advantages because they generally constructed near the coast, and they use cooling water from the sea. And so the usage of water is considerably lower. Natural gas is an interesting option in terms of reducing water consumption. So from everything I read, water is a serious constraint for the future. And I do think that has to be kept in mind in the whole picture.
But generally, you think we should be pursuing alternative options more aggressively than we are at the moment?
I think at the moment we are heavily dependent on coal. This is a serious risk. This is why I suggest that we do not control the price of coal downward. It just entrenches this dominance of coal. We need to diversify in order to manage risk.
But Eskom also needs to stay profitable or be able to pay for what you're constructing. I mean, Hilary, we talk about coal being a major driver of the electricity price, and of course a very contentious issue in South Africa. So if you have the coal price continuing to escalate beyond what you've looked at right now in the numbers, it is going to be detrimental to your construction plans and just kind of keeping Eskom afloat. Is that correct, or?
I wouldn't say just our construction plans. I would say our existing operations. 95% of the energy that South Africa uses at the moment comes from coal. Now, over time, we would certainly want to see that changing and diversifying. But at the moment, 95% of it is coal. Coal is half our operating costs. Any move in the price of coal has a very direct impact on the price of electricity. So that certainly is an issue.
But I see this, you're trying to have a foot in both camps. You want to keep the price of coal down and you want to diversify. Well, you can't do both.
That, of course, is something that government needs to look at as the regulator and someone who says, okay, well, but government has clearly indicated that their point of view right now is managing the coal price.
Yeah, this socialist view of centralized planning and control of pricing has unintended consequences. We've seen it in the past and we will see it in the future.
Quick question on control of pricing. You guys needed 16% increases for, I think it was 5 years, you got 8. How does that affect your ability to repay debt?
Not just our ability to repay debt, our ability to operate. I think we really are having we have had a very hard look at what it means. I won't pretend to you that we can live with 8 when we needed 16. It was a well thought through, carefully modelled application for 16, and 8 is quite dramatic, and we are looking at its implications in terms of our ability to meet our mandate, including our mandate of keeping the lights on. We're not only building the big power stations, we were undertaking a lot of other capital expenditure as well. So that has to be looked at, and we will come back with a clear review once we have gone through governance, spoken to our shareholder on this.
But Hilary, the regulator has given a very detailed and rational, published reasons for each and every percentage reduction that Eskom has been instructed to do. And I can't imagine that this is constraining your future build, because this 5-year pricing agreement, takes you only to the end of Medupi, Kusile, Ngula. So nothing in the existing 16% application that you made had anything to do with construction beyond Ngula, Medupi, and Kusile.
We are running out of time.
I don't buy that argument.
So if Hilary, you could just respond to that, because we do have to go to break.
That is correct, but the point I was making is that Medupi, Kusile, and Ngula are only some of the capex we're doing. We're also upgrading lines, strengthening networks so that people don't have power outages in winter in local areas. Refurbishing older power stations. So there is capital spending which we were looking to do over and above the big build projects, some of which we are clearly going to have to not do. And our operating costs, I think we are having to have a very, very careful look at, including whether we can afford the coal we need. Yeah.